Michael, will you wrap us up so that we can get to the questions part? And tell us, what's Mr. Thornberry going to be doing to protect freedom and privacy in the cybersecurity world? Tell us what he's thinking about in that area.
And I do thank you, Greg and Joshua, for inviting me here today. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I'll first start out with just kind of where the House is right now in the process of developing cybersecurity legislation. You may have seen that the Speaker recently announced the Technology Task Force, which has a number of issues with cybersecurity being a subset of that. But the Speaker has also indicated that for the cybersecurity issue specifically, that it will move more towards a member task force. And the Speaker is very committed to the regular order process of moving individual pieces within the individual committees, but he also recognizes that with cybersecurity, kind of how it touches every aspect of his life, that's also kind of echoed in the number of committees that have different jurisdictions over cybersecurity, and that has been one of our barriers for getting some cybersecurity legislation forward. And so that is where he has asked my boss, Mac Thornberry, to kind of spearhead this initiative. And it will, we don't have the formal announcement yet, but we likely think it'll work with having the task force kind of developing some of the policy goals, but the individual work within the lanes of jurisdiction will be done on the committee. And it's with the task force kind of developing the policy goals, those will yet to be seen kind of where that moves towards. But three of the areas that my boss has been interested in so far is kind of a three buckets that he normally talks about. And the first one is kind of finding a general set of incentives to kind of raise cybersecurity generally. I think we have to recognize that 85% of the cybersecurity critical infrastructure is owned by private companies, and instead of setting standards, you want to raise standards without setting standards. And we think some of the approaches we've seen where it's more of the top-down approach, we think that would have some unintended consequences that we would not like to see. And a second bucket that he's talked about is kind of examining a variety of the laws that we currently have in place and seeing where we can make small changes within those that would take us the proper way forward with the cybersecurity legislation. And the last bucket he talks about is kind of utilizing some of the tools that we currently have within the government to help protect our critical infrastructure. One way that we've seen that right now, when Micah was talking about, one of the good things that you can do with sharing information is sharing the tax signatures that you have. And recently, the DoD instituted the Defense Industrial Base 90-day cybersecurity initiative, and they've had a DIB project in place for a while where the defense companies could help facilitate in sharing tax signatures with each other. So if one company has identified and gone through the process of extracting those tax signatures, that they can share those with other companies so they can be aware to work for those. But the 90-day one is the first step where they've moved it out and involved the ISPs. And this is the process where the DoD can share some of its classified tax signatures and kind of give a box over to the ISPs, and then the DIB companies on a voluntary basis can take the emails that are received and give those to the ISPs, and they can cross-reference those tax signatures to see if there happens to be anything that pops up with coming in. So it's not an active streaming, but it's kind of the companies sharing their information with the ISPs to help identify those. But with Greg's first question of what Mac Thornberry is going to do to help secure privacy, as I think we do have to recognize that cybersecurity is not the end result, that it is the means to keep the internet open. You want to keep it open, you want to keep it privacy protected, and you want to keep that innovation flowing, and you don't want to do anything that restricts that, as Liesyl was saying, that you really need to take that do no harm approach. And just as you would make sure that anything that we do is kind of step in the right direction and consistent with free market principles, you also want to make sure that anything you do is consistent with privacy concerns. Because there's a lot of things that you can do that where you don't want to create unintended consequences, and plus you don't want to step on anyone's freedoms in that area. So I think as these policies move forward with kind of one difference we'll probably see from the Senate side is since they've been a little further along in the process, we've kind of seen what they're kind of developing. And their intention is to come up with a big comprehensive bill. But I think in the House, we'll likely see more of the smaller pieces moving, and that will be the big difference, so we can analyze smaller pieces. Because Mac doesn't think that we should try to solve the entire world in one bill, and don't think we should try, but we can take some small steps in the right direction that will get us there. And just as cybersecurity and technology evolves all the time, so will the need to look at what is going on and what we're doing. And I think, and part of that process of how people can kind of shape that concern is I know Greg and others from CDT have already testified at a couple of hearings this session on privacy concerns. But I think that is one good way to help shape where the legislation is going. And right now it's still kind of very infant in the process, but we are confident that this session that we can get something done, but we want it to be the right thing.
Thanks very much, Michael. I'm going to ask a couple of questions of the panelists and then open it up to questions from the audience. But before I do that, a little footnote. Senate side Judiciary Committee, 1 week from today, there's a hearing on the administration's cybersecurity proposals, and it's at a subcommittee chaired by Senator Whitehouse. I think Senator Whitehouse is very into these information sharing issues and the privacy issues that they implicate. So if you're following cybersecurity in Congress, that would be a good hearing to watch. Michael, one quick question. You mentioned the DIB project, Defense Industrial Base project, where the providers are basically working with industry to help with security, and the NSA is giving some classified signatures to facilitate that project. What's the flow back to the government? In other words, NSA says, hey, providers, watch out for these communications. Watch out for communications with this bad stuff. What's the flow back to the government from that charge? Because you could imagine a world where the NSA says, look for this stuff, and really what it wants to do is monitor this person or that person or this particular activity that might not be strictly cybersecurity. What's the flow back to the government?
As I understand how it works now is, I think at first they did envision where I think it's focused more on emails right now, where the emails would run through the ISPs, would cross that box first, and then, but I think now the companies, they had some of their own concerns with having their emails looked at by someone else first, that they get their emails and then they make a copy of them and then send those back to the ISP. And then if there is a hit, I believe that goes back to the company and the government. And I think it's DOD then has the purview, which I believe that the company who sent their emails over, they know that they had a hit on it, but I think it's the DOD's purview then if they want to share that information that they did get an active hit with the larger set of participants.
I guess I would be concerned about the flow back to the government. I think that's something to keep watching for. Susan, say a foreign government, imagine this scenario. Just imagine this. Foreign government says to a provider of a secure communication system, hey, we want you to design your system in this way because that will allow us to more easily wiretap communications that we, under our laws, whatever those might be, can wiretap. And they insist that the company locate a server in country through which those communications might pass and be available in unencrypted form. Imagine that might happen somewhere to some company. Is there any principle that a company could rely on to resist that? Any mechanism, any collectivity that they could turn to?
So I think in terms of just thinking about the principles that G&I's created over the last few years, which are based on international human rights standards, and really looking at how can you, in some ways, how can you create the same kind of protections in the online world that we have in the offline world in some ways. I think the role of the principles that we've developed, which, as I say, I'd go from being very broad in terms of how do you operationalize thinking about human rights implications of the decisions that companies are making, through to very, very specific things about if you receive a specific government request. I think if companies have signed up and become members of the Global Network Initiative, one of the things that they're able to do in conversations with governments is to say, we've signed up to this set of principles, this set of publicly available guidelines and principles that, and therefore, the specific request that you're making is difficult for us because we've got this set of principles. So it provides a way of engaging in a different kind of conversation with the government.
Thank you. And then, Liesyl, I had one question for you. Let me provoke you a little bit. So, say somebody came up to you. Imagine this. They said something like, this public-private partnership, it ain't working. And the evidence that it ain't working is every story that appears on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or the Washington Post about the latest cybersecurity incident. What would you say to those people?
Funny, I might have had to say it before. I guess my most probably pointed response would be because the government isn't using the partnership as well as it could be. As I mentioned, we have a framework that the government set up and industry joined under the NIP, and there is a very robust process for fueling the structure of the NIP. But there is, I would say,
Liesyl, what's the NIP?
The National Infrastructure Protection Plan, put up by DHS under the Bush administration. And I think too, it's fair to say that if the new administration comes in, they might want to take a look at what was done before. But there is two very important things about the NIP that industry is keen to retain. And one is that there is a framework and a structure that they have spent a lot of time investing in and helping to create and shape so that it is, in principle, a true partnership and not top-down. And the second thing is that it does include a very important sort of legal framework as well that does provide for a FACA exemption. And the reason that's important is because then, presumably, that enables a more trusted environment for sharing information. Now, when I say that I don't think the government is using it in a way that allows it to be viewed as not working, I think there's ways that both strategically and operationally, it's not well socialized throughout the government, and it's not the first thing that our partners often turn to say, okay, if I need to have a conversation with the industry about this particular incident, where do I go? It's usually